person do you think Gottlieb was? Like after, aside from all like the gruesome acts that he committed, torturing people and essentially murdering innocent people for these experiments, what kind of a guy was he outside of work?
That's another thing that makes Sidney Gottlieb so interesting. So he was the most gentle-hearted torturer you could ever imagine. Sidney Gottlieb, who carried out these horrifically grotesque experiments and just left a trail of blood and devastation behind him, was a sweetheart. He was like a proto-hippie. He lived unlike any civil servant in Washington in the 1950s, I'm sure. He lived in a cabin in the woods out in Virginia. It had no running water. He got up before dawn to milk his goats. He meditated. He studied Buddhism. He wrote poetry. He grew his own vegetables and brought homemade bread in to eat for lunch at the CIA. So somehow he was able to reconcile these two sides of his personality. While writing that book, Poisoner in Chief, I tried to imagine how he did that. He never spoke or wrote about his own feelings or about his own work. But I would ask myself, how does a person who's so unorthodox and so humanistic justify carrying out such bloody deeds? And I'm just speculating now, but maybe this is one thing he might have told himself. He might have said, I'm a very unorthodox person. I'm not like the mainstream guy, the way I live. And I'm able to do this because I live in a free country. We are now facing an enemy that wants to make it impossible forever for anybody ever to live like I do. Everyone's going to have to be an automaton and fit into the Procrustean Soviet bed. That's what we were being told in those days. And in order to prevent that from happening, in order to assure that meaningful life will be possible in the future and that everything that's creative and beautiful will be able to survive, I have to do these things. It shows you how you really can lose sight of the devastation you're causing by creating in your mind an image of something that you use to justify it.
How did he utilize LSD? And what sort of experiments was he involved with using LSD on his prisoners or his subjects or whatever? And how is the LSD part of this significant?
Gottlieb was fascinated by LSD. It had only recently been discovered when he came to the CIA. And the fact that it could have such potent effects in such small quantities, and it was colorless and odorless, made him think that this might be the key to mind control. He was so fixated on LSD that in 1953, Sidney Gottlieb persuaded the CIA to buy the entire world supply of LSD. And the CIA did that. They bought it from Sandoz in Switzerland, which was the sole producer. So what did Gottlieb then do with that LSD? Well, part of it he used in horrifically grotesque experiments that were highly coercive. And he wanted to see if LSD could be used to destroy a human mind. And I think he probably found out, yeah, it can. For example, I discovered documents citing an experiment in the federal prison in Lexington, Kentucky. In this experiment, 7 African-American inmates were segregated and given triple doses of LSD every day for 77 days without being told what was happening to them or what they were being given. The purpose of that experiment presumably was to find out if that kind of an overdose can destroy a human mind. And undoubtedly the answer is yes, you can. We never were able to find out who those people were. The records were destroyed. And so I've often wondered, those 7 guys, did they survive? Did they ever figure out? They couldn't have known what had happened to them. They were trapped in this MKUltra web. So LSD was used for terrible purposes under Sidney Gottlieb's supervision. That was not, however, the only way that he used LSD. He had an entire other interest, and that was to find out how ordinary people would react to LSD under clinical circumstances. So he decided he wanted to set up experiments in normal hospitals, or research facilities. And so what he did was he set up a couple of bogus medical foundations to disguise the fact that the money was coming from the CIA. And he had these foundations notify hospitals and university clinics around the United States that this foundation, wants to sponsor and pay for experiments in this new psychoactive substance called LSD. And we will supply you with the LSD. You will then advertise in newspapers for volunteers. You will tell them exactly what it is, what's going to happen to them. You will pay them with money we will give you. And all you have to do is write down reports on their responses, and we pay you for this. As a result of these overtures, almost overnight, a whole new market grew up for research in LSD, and a number of hospitals began carrying out these experiments. Some of the very first people who volunteered to come in and try this new psychoactive drug were people who went on to become godfathers of the counterculture. One of the first was Ken Kesey, the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which was like the first counterculture Bible. He took LSD at the Menlo Park Veterans Administration Hospital in California in an experiment that was sponsored and paid for by the CIA, although he didn't know that, and neither did the hospital. They thought it was paid by some foundation. Ken Kesey loved the LSD. He went so far as to get a job in the hospital. That's what provided him with all the material for that book, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But as he later said, that wasn't the reason he got the job in the hospital. It wasn't because he wanted to gather material for a book. It was because he wanted to steal the LSD and take it home and share it with all his friends, which is what he did. Allen Ginsberg, the radical poet, later a great LSD evangelist, also got his first LSD through one of these experiments in California. So did Robert Hunter, the lyricist for the Grateful Dead, who immediately took LSD home and told all his other Grateful Dead friends, you've got to go and try this drug. It was through Gottlieb that LSD leaked out of laboratories and into the counterculture. John Lennon was asked about LSD in his famous Playboy interview, and he said, we must always remember to thank the CIA. Now, John Lennon had never heard of Sidney Gottlieb. Nobody had. But if he had, he would have said, we must always remember to thank Sidney Gottlieb. So unwittingly, Gottlieb became kind of a godfather of the counterculture. And of course, the irony is that the drug that Gottlieb hoped would give the CIA the tool to control the world actually wound up fueling a generational rebellion, which was aimed at destroying everything the CIA stands for.
Wow. Wow. Now, did a lot of people talk about with drugs, psychedelics specifically, like psilocybin mushrooms or LSD, there's a thing that happens called ego death. Was he aware of that? And was that kind of what he was aiming for when you talk about destroying someone's mind, destroying their ego?
I think that Gottlieb was more interested in the effect of massive doses. I don't think he was interested so much in using it for psychic exploration. He did that for himself. He later said he used LSD at least 200 times. And I'm sure he was also a psychic voyager, but that wasn't his professional interest. He was not interested in using it as a way to increase people's understanding of life or themselves. He was interested in using it as a tool for covert action. And he was trying to find out if it could be a way to destroy a mind so that another kind of psychic suggestion could be inserted. Later, he finally concluded that it was, as he put it, too unpredictable. You couldn't tell how LSD is going to affect a particular person in a particular situation. Some might become very talkative and tell you what you want to hear. Others become very defiant. They have just the opposite reaction. So ultimately, he found that LSD was not reliable for this purpose, but self-experimentation was definitely one of his principles. And I'll tell you something that happened to me right after this book was published, and I was being questioned about it. I had wondered in my own mind this question. Gottlieb came up with such bizarre, totally sick, if you want to look at them from an outside perspective, ideas for experiments. How do you combine various forms of torture all at once to see if they can destroy a person? Is it possible that he could have conceived some of these experiments while he was actually tripping on acid himself? Yes. And when I suggested this, somebody even offered us another step forward that I had never even thought of, which is Gottlieb was traveling around the world to observe these experiments, including experiments in which people were experimented to death. Do you think he could have been on acid while he's actually watching the experiments unfold? Who knows?
Wow. Now, so did he ever find any sort of success? Did he ever successfully destroy somebody's mind?
I'm sure he destroyed many minds and he killed many people. We have plenty of cases in which the person was reduced back practically to a vegetable state. I talk about one woman in Canada who went in because she had postpartum depression. She went in for counseling with a psychologist. She was seized and placed into basically pulled into the web of the MKUltra madness. And she was, for the rest of her life, unable to recognize her relatives or hold a fork. Her mind was successfully destroyed. We have no idea how many people this happened to, but the number must be quite substantial. So the paperback edition of my book has just come out, and I added an afterword at the end. And one of the things I say is that since the hardcover came out 1 year ago, I've been getting emails from people saying, I've been spending the last 50 years trying to find out what happened to me. Well, I think I was caught up. I believe I was an MKUltra victim. Now that I put the pieces together and I see who was where, what was going on, I think it was me. That's what destroyed my life. How can I find out? And all I can say is you can't. But there are a lot of poignant stories out there. And at one point, Sidney Gottlieb, in a piece of then secret testimony, said something like, I want the members of this committee to know that I found this work very difficult. It was challenging. It wasn't what I liked to do, but it was very important. So when he said it was very difficult, that's what he's referring to. It was very difficult that I had to supervise all that. So he must have put himself into a mindset where he was able to justify it.